This video is going to be a bit about freehand painting, and I don't want to scare you with anything advanced. On the contrary, it's very simple. It all started with the fact that I painted this clay wraith stalker, and I got bored with the regular sort of brown, boring color scheme I was, aiming for, and I made him sort of pink, and he's got a blue kind of pattern going on his cloak. And I also did this one here. It's got sort of a checkered thing going. Anyway, I got some questions of how I painted the freehand, and I know that there's people out there that are really skilled at drawing and at freehand things. They can draw an eagle or a dragon or whatever on there, and it looks like it's actually an eagle and not a blob of paint, like when I try, because I have no skills in the drawing department. I can hardly draw a straight line, pretty much. So with that in mind, I figured there might be more like me out there that not really all that skilled. You might still be interested in wanting to paint some freehand. So I wanted to share how I did it, and that might get you going, give it a try, because in the end you can have some fun results with just some simple patterns. So to start off with, I'm gonna show you my dwarves here, my dwarf project. It's dwarves from a small. They've got a cannon, and there's 3 dwarves. 2 of them have got actual clothing. The other one's he's working out too much, and he wants to show off his muscles, so he's not actually wearing a shirt. But these 2 fellows, they've got shirts on. You obviously don't have to paint whatever you're painting blue, but you start off with the base color, what's going to be covering most of the miniature. And it can also depend on what colors you're painting. Like in this case, with this checkered fella, I started out painting him all white, because obviously the black is going to cover up the white better. If I would have painted him black and tried to make white checkers on him, that would have been difficult. So depending on what you're doing, like the dwarves, I start with the blue. With this fellow, I started with the red, because it's just a thin blue pattern on. But if it's a case of a really dark or a lighter color, you might want to start with the lighter one, as long as it's not just some small patterns that are going to be lighter. If you're into details, the blue is basically a heavy blue, game color from Vallejo, and it's sort of the highlights, because it's layer painted. Layer painting is basically when you start with your base color, and then everything that's sort of sticking out a little bit, you paint it with a lighter and a lighter color, and everything that's sort of in a crevice, you paint with a darker color. So there's no washes or anything like that. It's just layer painted. Anyway, the base is heavy blue, and then the highlights are sort of heavy blue mixed in with pastel blue, and then only pastel blue, and then final highlights are sort of pastel blue and some white. And then the shadows are actually, I mixed in some of this jade green. So once you've got your base color, I take a pencil. Do you call it a lead pencil? Like a really fine point, and draw whatever pattern it is you want. In my case, I'm just doing straight lines, so it's going to be like stripes going down. And I mean, obviously you can do whatever. In this case, I did some kind of almost looks like a Native American, South American Inca kind of a thing going, or in this case it was checkers. But all of this, first I draw it out with a lead pencil. And the trick is, at least when it comes to cloth or whatever it is, or anything you paint, is trying to follow like the shape of the cloth and the shape of the miniature. Like if you have cloth going like this, but you've got a straight line going just right down, it's going to look a little bit weird. So wherever there's like a crevice in the shirt, the line needs to follow that crevice. And if you're sort of uncertain of, well, what way should it go, then an easy way is to grab a piece of tissue, whatever, draw a straight line on it, and then fold it, sort of similar as to whatever it is you're trying to paint is folded, and you can see sort of what happens to that straight line. And after you've done that a couple of times, then you'll actually not have to use the tissue all that much more. You'll just know that, okay, when it goes in, it goes that way. But it's kind of important to try and follow the flow of the clothing or the armor or whatever it is you're painting on. Like if you have a rounded shield, then maybe it should be a slight curve so that it looks like it's following the curve of the shield. You see what I'm getting at. So once you've got your pattern all penciled out, it's just about, painting whatever color it is you want on that pattern. I mean, in my case, I've got stripes going down, so I've painted the edges of where I want the stripes. If you've got just this sort of a zig, like this fellow's just got patterns going like this, it's just the one pencil mark. And when you start painting, obviously you have to make sure that you actually cover the pencil marks. So have that in mind when you're doing the pencil, when you're doing the pattern at first. Have in mind that that actually has to be covered by paint. So you might want to make things narrow, a bit more narrow than what the final paint will cover, because obviously you need to cover the pencil. I said that already. Now, when it comes to choosing not what color to paint, but sort of how bright or dark it should be. In my case, in the end, I wanted to look like they've got sort of white stripes, but I'm not going to start with the white. I start with something a little bit darker. I've got this stone gray from Vallejo that I've mixed in a little bit of white, but it's mainly stone gray. And so I start with a stone gray and I cover the white stripes. In the case with this fellow, I know it's difficult to see from all the way over there, but he's got blue stripes, and it's actually 3 different blues. There's a middle, a dark, and a light. And so I started with the middle blue. And in essence, it's the same thing I'm going to do with these white stripes. I start with sort of a middle white, which in theory is sort of a brownish gray. And then there's going to be a darker shade, and then there's going to be a lighter shade. In the end, it'll look sort of white. If you would only paint the one color, it would look sort of flat and boring. So we need to get some shades and things in there. So start with sort of the middle color or whatever choice of color it's a really complicated sentence, and I'm saying color a lot, but I think you get what I mean. Start with like the middle shade. So once the white lines with the stripes are in place, I mix in a little bit of black into the stone gray to create a darker shade, and draw thin lines right on the edge of both sides of the stripes. This is just in the end to give these stripes a little bit more depth. So they would be darker on the sides, they've got the middle color in the middle, and then later on I'll paint a brighter sort of white in the middle. And it just gives them more depth than the fact that they were just the one color. Now, there's no sort of logic to this. I mean, the darker bits could be sort of stitching from stitched on stripes or, whatever. But when looking at it, when it's done, it just gives more depth to whatever pattern you're doing. If we look at this ghostly fella, I mean, he hasn't got stripes, he's just got lines. With him, I started with like the middle blue, and then I did a darker blue on all the edges that were sort of pointing towards the floor, the ground, the mausoleum floor. And then a lighter blue, everything pointing up towards the sky. It just gives them a little bit of a 3-dimensional effect that, everything that's pointing down is a bit darker, everything up top is a bit brighter. And it looks nice, but it also looks kind of more natural. I realized this was a lot more difficult to explain than I thought. But the important thing is just to not draw the one color or the one shade, but adding a nuance to it. That didn't make sense either. I don't know. You'll just have to watch and see if you like it and decide for yourself. But seeing as this is my video, I'm just going to tell you how I did it and why I like it and explain it badly. So back to the dwarf. With the darker lines in place, I mix in some white with a stone grey, and I try to paint in the middle of the white stripes. So I don't cover them completely. What you want is sort of a gradient. I know that this is just 3 stripes, but holding the miniature like this, There he is. Oh, look, a gradient. I paint the middle of all the stripes in a brighter color. So that's it's sort of a three-step process. It's the same with this fellow here. It's the middle, it's the darker, and it's the brighter. Now that my stripes are done, they're looking nice. They've got a bit more life to it when there's the three, the middle white and the white and the dark white. I'm trying. It's still the same tone all the way, even though the cloth might actually go in, where in theory it should be a little bit more shaded, or where it's really sort of sticking out. If there's a curve like this in the cloth where it's sticking out, it should be a bit brighter. So I mix in more white with whatever the brightest shade was before, and sort of just touch up the highlights. So wherever I got a ridge or anything sticking out, I just add a little bit more white, and it'll look like, the cloth is flowing out, so it's a little bit brighter there. And then in reverse, I do the same thing. I have my darkest mixture, I add in a bit more black and really dilute it so it doesn't screw things up too much. You could even add like a purple or something like that to get another tone. This will make it look like the cloth is sort of flowing nicely and that these stripes are actually part of the cloth and not just painted on stripes. If we look at my little ghostly fella here, I did the same thing, only I think in this case I used some washes, probably like a really diluted blue wash, that I painted in the crevices on top of the entire pattern. And wherever the pattern's sort of really sticking out, I used a brighter blue highlight on the edges of the blue so that it really looks like it's part of the cloth and flowing with the cloth. And once again, same thing with the checkered fella. Wherever the white checkers are in a shade, I painted them with a little bit more of a gray in the absolute recesses and highlighted whatever is, sticking out. There's a bit of his shoulder here sticking out on a white. And actually same with the black. In the crevices, it's sort of even a darker black. Is there a darker black? It's a black. And it sort of goes almost to a little bit of a gray on the absolute sort of highlights. And I think that's these two things, like for one thing, not just using the one color for the pattern, using 2 or 3 to give it sort of a little bit of a gradient in the pattern itself, but then sort of edge highlighting and making it darker in the recesses is sort of the trick to make the pattern look like it's actually part of the cloth and not just painted on there. And this is what the lovely little fellas look like when they're done. I think painting patterns, obviously it's another time-consuming thing. I'm at the moment, I'm in a time-consuming phase, but especially these dwarves, because they've got like the one piece of cloth, it looks like a jacket / it's like all of it is the same piece, and just doing them in one color, I felt it was just a little bit boring, and I wanted to add something more to the miniature and painting patterns and things like that. And in this case, it's just stripes. It doesn't really require all that much of me in the way of skill when it comes to drawing. It just takes a little bit more time, but it's not difficult. It's just drawing lines and figuring out where the lines should be. It's not like I'm trying to paint an eagle or a dragon or whatever. So it's a nice way of just getting a bit more of a personal touch on your miniature and making them look a little bit more fun. And especially on like really flat surfaces like a shield or anything like that, it's really worth giving it a go. I do want to add that the worst thing that can happen if you try this is all you have to do is paint it over and start again. Like initially I had this idea that I wanted to do like a dwarf kind of symbol thing on their backs, and I sort of tried to figure one out. I drew it on a piece of paper and then I started sort of sketching it out on the miniature, and In the end, that was beyond me. I it looked like crap. Sorry, beep. So what happened then? Well, I just painted blue again, and then did the white stripes. So don't be afraid to just experiment, because the worst thing that can happen is that it turns out not very nice, and you just paint it with blue again, or whatever color is your base color, and then go for something simpler, or just try again. Um, it's not the end of the world if you mess up. Bye.